All right, here we go. We made it to the end of the chapter, and we're getting ready to go through some additional changes here as we've put this country together, as we've put this federal government together. Boy, has it, you know, during this early test, it's encountered some pretty significant challenges. Today we're going to begin with what is known as Martial Court. Now, Martial Court is going to be the span of time in which the judicial branch is able to prove itself as a vital third branch of government. We saw earlier in the chapter the executive branch. Boy, did we get some early rock stars as far as presidents go, and how they could expand it, with Washington's Whiskey Rebellion to Jefferson's purchase of Louisiana yesterday. We saw this executive branch be successful. We also saw the legislative branch go through a few congressional elections and really be a representation of the people. But we still had the question, was this branch going to work? And as of yesterday, we hadn't answered that yet. So what we're going to see here is from Washington to Adams to Jefferson, we really see this federalist domination of one political party, mainly in a lot of the branches, until the end of the block yesterday, where we saw Jefferson come in with a new political party known as the Democratic Republicans. But we left off yesterday. I hit the pause button on us on the conversation we were having about the judges here in the judicial branch. Now, when John Adams is getting ready to leave office, okay, he's lost the election of 1800 to Thomas Jefferson, he recognizes that he forgot to do something. He forgot to appoint district judges, specifically one in Washington, D.C. Now, how could he forgot this? Well, he really thought he was probably going to win the election. He was going to have 4 more years to do it. So real quickly, what he does is he tries to appoint judges before he leaves office. Of course, he wants to appoint judges the same political party as him, which would be the Federalist. That way they stay in power. Even though he has to leave office, his political party would still be in power, specifically in Washington, D.C. So he tells his buddy William Marbury that he's going to give him a judgeship in the District of Columbia. He writes up the paperwork, and just before he leaves office, he hands him to little Jimmy. This is James Madison. Madison is Secretary of State. Madison's buddy is Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson is getting ready to be president the very next day. So if Madison turns in his homework, let's say he turns in the appointmentship for Marbury, Marbury would be a Federalist judge added to the court. But if Madison holds on to it and just says, oops, I forgot, the next day Jefferson gets to appoint somebody to the judgeship who could be of his political party, the Democratic Republicans. And that is exactly what happened. Marbury sues Madison. Oh boy. What happens now? It goes to the Supreme Court. And when it goes to the Supreme Court, there is a Federalist judge by the name of John Marshall, who is in charge of this court case known as Marbury versus Madison. It just so happens that the judge, John Marshall, is Thomas Jefferson's cousin. Okay, so how is this going to play out? Well, here's how it goes down. Chief Justice John Marshall pulls out his copy of the U.S. Constitution. He pulls out the Judiciary Act of 1789. He says, He measures it. He reviews it. He looks at the U.S. Constitution, and he makes his ruling. He says there's nowhere in the United States Constitution that says that Madison had to turn in his homework. Nor does it say that Marbury was guaranteed his appointmentship. Because let's be real, Adams had 4 years to appoint him. And he wants to do it in the last few minutes of his presidency? So William Marbury, I'm sorry, you're out of a job. And Madison, you can go on and be Vice President of the United States and President of the United States someday. Now, that's the storyline. Here's what's important. What we see here is we just watched the Supreme Court take an act of Congress and tell them and measure it. They reviewed it according to the Constitution and said, look, it's unconstitutional. It's not valid. This isn't going to work. So if we look at my diagram, here's kind of what happens. With that one ruling, the judicial branch makes its way to the top and becomes the Supreme Court and the supreme interpreters of the law. of the Constitution. They can check the president, checks and balances. They can check the legislative branch, checks and balances. And they can check the states, checks and balances. Here's your definition. Marbury v. Madison was a landmark court decision. It was a landmark court decision that established judicial review. That established judicial review. My next term, back to the seas, back to England and France, back to our trading issues. We learned yesterday in 1803 that when Jefferson wanted to buy the port of New Orleans, Napoleon said, "Why don't you buy the whole thing for $15 million?" And we did. In turn, the French, I would say, began to ease attacking our ships as we entered an agreement with them over the purchase. But from 1803 to 1812, the British never stopped. In fact, they attacked our ships every day. They seized our naval men, and they impressed them into the British Navy. They never got to come home and see their families or their kids. Forevermore, they would be part of the British Navy. And we let this go on for 9 years. As Jefferson leaves office, and as I foreshadowed, James Madison comes into office. He says enough is enough. And he decides that he might take America back to war against the British. Additionally, on the frontier, the British were trading out of Canada with the Shawnee Indians. And the Shawnee Indians were using guns against American settlers who were trying to move into the Northwest Territory. Because of those two reasons, James Madison had no choice but to send America back to war. My first term here is called British impressment. British impressment was a process of taking American naval men and forcing them into the British Navy. That leads us to our next term, the War of 1812. Here's your definition. The War of 1812 was a result of British impressment, comma, land in Canada, or the British in Canada, let's go with that, the British in Canada, comma, and Native American attacks. The thought was if we could get the British out of Canada, we could maybe take Canada over and get a bunch of land, take over the fur trade. We could definitely keep them from giving guns to Native Americans, and we could definitely keep them from attacking our sailors. So America finds itself in war again. Except this time, we're not looking too good. The British send over massive fleets of ships, kick our butt all throughout the Great Lakes region. They even invade Washington, D.C. and burn the White House, our brand new building we just put together a couple days ago. James Madison's wife, Nellie, has to take a portrait of George Washington off the wall to save it. She runs out of the White House with it, trying to protect it. It's still there today. She saved it. Well, needless to say, we were not doing very well. And Madison realizes that we're too small of a nation to win such a big war. But if we rewind a little bit, that doesn't really make sense because we just beat the British not that long ago. Except back then we had a cause. We were fighting for independence. We really couldn't muster up a cause here to get the American people aboard. So we sent some diplomats over to Ghent, Belgium, a neutral place over in Europe where we could meet the British and we could sign a peace treaty and end the war. Well, as the peace treaty is being worked out, and the British agree the war's over, and we agree the war's over, we agree they get to keep Canada, and we get to keep what we already have. So we really didn't even gain nothing, and they didn't lose anything, which is what they came to. Why are we fighting anyways? They promised not to attack American ships, and they shook our hands and agreed to be our partners from then until today. We have a great alliance with Great Britain all the way from that period till today. Well, as you know, and I know, it takes 3 months to get news back to America. So in the span of 3 months, something big went down. In New Orleans, we have an admiral by the name of Andrew Jackson, who has been given permission to attack the British at the port of New Orleans. Well, before he knew the war was over, he organized the Cherokee Indians and the Creek Indians to help him attack the British. And lo and behold, there he goes, taking ships right into New Orleans, and not just attacking the British fleet, but sinking every freaking ship. All of a sudden, the British presence there in New Orleans is at the bottom of the sea. With the help of those soldiers who jumped overboard and swam onto the beach, the Native Americans who were helping Jackson were on the beach. They picked them off left and right. It was a brutal defeat. And it also catapulted Andrew Jackson's name. It also took the momentum of the war to allow Americans to start to say we're winning. And some Americans would later say we won the war because of the Battle of New Orleans. Well, eventually news gets back to America and we find out that the war had been over for 3 months. We just didn't know about it. Too late now. The British fleet's at the bottom of New Orleans harbor. And America writes its own history and claims victory in the War of 1812. Here's your definition for the Battle of New Orleans. It was a major battle during the War of 1812. It was a major battle during the War of 1812, led by Andrew Jackson. Led by Andrew Jackson. Quick side note, in Baltimore, when they hear about the victory of New Orleans, the sailors who are aboard the ships, they've been singing old beer songs. They've been having a little too much to drink. And when they hear of the victory, they start firing their cannons for no reason but to celebrate. Francis Scott Key's laying there. Maybe he had a few drinks, maybe he did. He starts to write a song. Before long, he puts words together, and today we call it the Star-Spangled Banner. One great thing we got out of the War of 1812, other than a national hero in Andrew Jackson. That's the end of chapter 3.